What makes a good person? This is a question that has occupied philosophers since, well, philosophy started. Plato believed that goodness was in a way analogous to light, in that just as light allows us to see, goodness allows us to know and understand things. Aristotle thought this was a load of waffle. In fact, Plato had a pretty dim view of humans in general, believing government was best entrusted to a benevolent genius dictator he termed a philosopher king. The main source we have for his opinions is his Republic, where he has a fictionalized Socrates, who unfortunately never wrote down anything himself, debate various other philosophers less well remembered by history. This is also where the allegory of the cave comes from, where humanity sees only the shadow of true things upon the inner wall of a metaphorical cave, and Plato believed that only those who have left the cave and seen the truth of the world deserve to rule. But how do we know who's left the cave? Honestly, the whole work focuses on seemingly obvious questions like, if you borrow someone's knife, isn't it just to return it? Well, what if they've gone crazy in the interim and stabbed themselves with it? Would that be just? There's a reason why philosophy is often derided as just being navel-gazing. The most interesting part of the Republic is the story of the Ring of Gyges, which turns the wearer invisible, letting them act without consequence. I know what you're thinking, and it's possible but not proven that Tolkien was inspired by this story when crafting his masterwork. One of Plato's mouthpieces, Glaucon, is convinced that any sensible person wearing such a ring would do whatever they wanted to improve their station and livelihood, regardless of how much it hurt others, as he believed that people only behave properly out of a fear of punishment. Fictional Socrates does his best to refute this, but this idea of goodness requiring an outside pressure to keep people in line is a pretty major theme of most Western religions. Follow this simple list of 10 rules or you go to the Bernie place when you die. Even Eastern religions focus on following rules. If you want to reach enlightenment, follow the Eightfold Path. For a good society, follow the Confucian principles. But the rules laid out by philosophers and priests tend to be very succinct, with no room for nuance. Thou shalt not steal. Well, what if you're literally starving? Or what if you've been stolen from? Is it stealing if you take back from the thief? Or what if someone hoarded more than their fair share? Thou shalt not kill! Well, then how do we justify war? Or in the opposite direction, what about assisted suicide? You're probably thinking to yourself, this seems rather heavy for a review of a children's cartoon, and you're probably right, but I don't really care. Many others before me have pointed out that children's media should be held to just as high a standard as media intended for adults, if not a higher one, as children are far more impressionable. And when a film tackles a serious topic, I think it's only fitting to discuss that topic seriously. Pinocchio is based on a novel of the same name written by Italian author Carlo Collodi. The book is rather darker than the film, and I would argue more cynical about human nature. Literary Pinocchio starts off as a horrible, rowdy, disobedient miscreant and only learns to be a productive member of society by being repeatedly assaulted and punished when he makes a mistake. He is repeatedly told that boys are naturally naughty and that he must fight those impulses and be obedient to his father. In fact, his goodness and whether or not he gets to become a real boy is contingent upon his obedience to authority figures. Now, the book doesn't go full fascist. There are a few instances where Pinocchio's disobedience gets him out of trouble, and he's portrayed as having done the right thing in those instances, especially when his life is on the line. But the Blue Fairy rewards him with full humanity not after he rescues his father from the belly of a sea monster, almost dying in the process, but only after he actually puts in a hard day's work. According to Collodi, goodness means listening to your parents and not being a lazy ragamuffin. He'd fit in quite well with all those Fox News hosts complaining about welfare queens. In fact, one particular sequence feels almost like a Republican pull yourself up by your bootstraps fever dream. Pinocchio, starving, comes upon a village where everyone has a job and no one is lazy, and when he begs them for a few coins to buy some food, he is told by each person he asks that he'll get paid double if he does a few chores for them, but otherwise they'll give nothing to a lazy beggar. Not a single resident has charity in their heart for a starving child, and never mind that telling the unemployed to just get a job ignores the reality that poverty and in particular homelessness are perpetuated by capitalism. Realistically, how can you get a job if you don't have nice clean clothes for your interview, or you can't provide an address on the employment form, or you don't have a car to drive to the office? Maybe in a rural area you might be able to just walk up to a farm and offer to help help out in exchange for some cash under the table, but that way of doing things is rife with the potential for worker abuse, as we see happening with migrant workers near the Mexican border. It's also worth noting that most of the people telling you to get a job don't really do much all day themselves. One of the last sequences for Book Pinocchio is his extended stay not at Pleasure Island, but the land of, and I am not kidding, cocaine. It's an etymological coincidence, don't worry. In medieval European folk tradition, cocaine is a utopia where peasants don't have to work, have no lord or master, and there is an unending supply of food. Apparently, it would rain cheese. To those medieval peasants, this was a dream, a place to be yearned for, a better world, a heaven on earth. Yet Collodi sees it as a place of vice and sin that will inevitably turn the lazy and indolent into donkeys. For Collodi, to be good, to be human, is to labor, to be productive, to be a functioning cog in society. Only the elderly and the infirm are allowed to rest. Everyone else must work for their daily bread. Now, I know a significant number of you keyboard warriors watching don't see an issue with this and are all too eager to take to the comments to call me a commie or a pinko or a bleeding heart liberal. But one thing that should be kept in mind here is, in Collodi's time and in the setting of the book, the labor one does is actually productive and necessary. Someone needs to milk the cows or pump water from the well or carry lime and charcoal to where they need to be, and if no one does those things, then we all starve or die of exposure. Collodi wasn't talking about sitting in an open plan office typing numbers into an Excel spreadsheet every day, or being a project manager, or a vice president of outreach, or an administrative dean, or a hedge fund analyst, or whatever other made-up sinecure neoliberalism has come up with lately. And even then, is that really how we want to define goodness? How we want to define the point of being human? Work? Do we really all just live to work? What about art, food, good company, reading and writing, talking and laughing, sharing and comparing, trusting and helping? There's also been a major innovation since Collodi wrote his most famous work. We now have real-life Pinocchii, robots, AI. We don't need human beings to stand at the cash register in a grocery store. We have a robot who does that for us. Robots build our cars, make our toys, even fly our airplanes. And the greatest sin of capitalism has been that instead of automation leading to a real-life land of cocaine, it has instead meant the poverty of those whose jobs were replaced by robots. Robots have also been the main modern lens for the Pinocchio story. While there certainly have been many straight adaptations for stage and screen, both before and after Disney's original film, the highest profile versions of the tale have replaced a wooden puppet with a machine. Bicentennial Man, AI, Artificial Intelligence, iRobot. These are all stories of machines wanting to become human, or at least to be treated as equals to humans. Something about this story has resonated with us collectively as we keep retelling it in different versions. Not so much the how of Pinocchio's transformation to realness, but the why. The wanting to be real, the wanting to be good, to be a person. A side note on Bicentennial Man. There is a female robot character named Galatea, a reference to the ancient Greek story of Pygmalion. It always comes back to the Greeks. In the original myth, the sculptor Pygmalion carves a statue so beautiful he falls in love with it, and Aphrodite takes pity on him and brings the statue to life as a woman named Galatea. In the film, the main character, Andrew, is looking for other robots like himself who display a level of humanity, but it turns out Galatea has simply been programmed to behave in a human manner, and lacks the true spark of consciousness that Andrew has developed. Collodi did not invent the idea of an inanimate humanoid being brought to life. This is an ancient idea in storytelling. What Collodi did, and what all storytellers do when they remix an old tale, is change the point of this story. Pygmalion is about the relationship between art and the artist, while Pinocchio, the book, concerns itself with teaching children how to behave properly, at least according to the values of Collodi's time. All of this is to say, I like the Disney film better than the Collodi original. I realize it's taken me about 10 minutes to get to the supposed topic of this video essay, but I felt like a bit of groundwork and background was necessary before diving into what some might claim, and not without reason, to be Disney's masterpiece. Adaptation is a tricky business, and there's a difference between a good adaptation and a faithful adaptation. Sometimes the source material ain't great, or doesn't translate well to a new medium. Sometimes the source material is good, but just hasn't aged well. tell. This point is aimed mostly at the Wheel of Time book fans bitching about the show, cause like, Jesus Christ, if I wanted a 10-episode season of women getting spanked, I'd just go to Pornhub. Sometimes a film is better for the changes made, like the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and sometimes a film is worse for the changes made, like the Hobbit trilogy. And Pinocchio has been adapted, as previously mentioned, a lot, even discounting the reimaginings. I actually quite liked the new Guillermo del Toro film, but its focus was less on what it means to be good and more on the nature of life and death, that is, what it means to be alive. For the Disney film, the 1940 original, not the live-action remake, I will never ever do even a thanks I hate it video on those abominations. The focus is squarely on what it means to be a good person. Hey look, it's the thesis of the video! The original novel is very episodic with a lot crammed into a relatively short book. It's a pretty brisk 2-hour read, and the Disney studio winnowed that down to 3 main scenes: the puppet show, the land of lazy boys, and the sea monster. Each of these is instrumental in showing Pinocchio's character arc and makes the film much more cohesive and flow better than the novel. And just as an aside, the animation in this movie is incredible. Easily some of the best 2D work ever put to film. Like, I would love to show you just the entirety of this tracking shot through Geppetto's village to showcase the multiplane camera, but YouTube's copyright bots would probably throw a hissy fit, so I highly encourage you to watch it for yourself. It is, even to this day, astonishing. What's also kind of astonishing is that our main character does not show up until about 25 minutes into the film, which takes its time warming us up to the setting and our supporting cast. For Pinocchio himself, I'll quote Maurice Sendak, who put it quite well. The Pinocchio in the film is not the unruly, sulking, vicious, devious, albeit still charming, marionette that Collodi created. Neither is he an innately evil, doomed to calamity child of sin. He is, rather, both lovable and loved. Where Collodi seems to believe that boys are intrinsically troublemakers, clearly taking a leaf out of Hobbes's Leviathan, the Disney version is more of a blank slate. Lux tabula rasa. Film Pinocchio is simply a child, knowing how to walk and talk, but otherwise fully ignorant yet full of curiosity. He does not do things out of malice, but because he simply doesn't know what's going on yet. He's constantly asking questions, like every child, because he wants to understand.
Why? 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 Why?
Oh, because.
Oh.
But that ignorance is what leads him astray. The same eager curiosity that makes him want to obey his father and go to school also makes him an easy mark for Honest John and Gideon. When Pinocchio fails, it's not because he was a devil of a child who deserves to be punished for his wickedness. He's simply a scared little boy whose naivete was taken advantage of. When he's locked away by Stromboli and when he faces being transformed into a donkey, the framing is not that this is a just punishment for his sins, but that this is a horrible situation he's fallen into through a few bad decisions. We sympathize with him, as does Jiminy Cricket, who functions as our audience surrogate, who, by the way, begins the film as a traveling hobo, the exact sort of vagrant that Collodi would have despised. Yet there is nothing in the framing of the film to suggest we should think of Jiminy as an awful person or a bad influence. In fact, the Cricket is surprisingly human. Despite being assigned as Pinocchio's conscience, he often struggles himself with doing the right thing. We see him lose his temper,
I'll knock your block off!
abandon Pinocchio more than once, and he's even portrayed with an oddly healthy sexual appetite, bizarre both for its presence in a Disney movie as well as it for being entirely interspecies. Why aren't you horny for other crickets, Jiminy, you goddamn furry? But that's all mostly played for laughs, and we can see that Jiminy is really trying to do the right thing and to be both a good role model for the young puppet as well as to guide him as best he can. I just love the part where Pinocchio is first suckered in by Honest John, and Jiminy thinks that he should go notify Geppetto when he stops, looks directly at the audience, and says,
No, that'd be snitching.
Jiminy doesn't always give the best advice, but he still encourages Pinocchio to try, to strive, to be good. And this striving is challenged by 3 tests, each involving a different villain. Honest John functions as temptation for the first 2 incidents, first conning Pinocchio into being an actor for Stromboli, then basically kidnapping him for the coachman. He represents the con artist, the snake oil salesman, the military recruiter, the loan shark, even the corrupt politician, any malicious actor twisting words to convince a young person to act against their own interests. And the cons he perpetrates are portrayed less as a just comeuppance for a naughty the ingrate, but as a warning to the young audience, so they can recognize and avoid the honest Johns of the real world. Where the book tells the reader, bad behavior will be punished, so be good, the film tells the watcher, not everyone has your best interests at heart. Stay away from demagogues and flim-flammers. It's the difference between spanking a child and telling them because I say so, and sitting them down and explaining to them why what they're doing is wrong. Children aren't stupid. You can talk to them, you can reason with them, and you can teach them acceptable behavior without resorting to physical violence or other abusive punishments. So how does Pinocchio learn to be good? First, he is whisked away in a flurry of fast talk by Honest John to join Stromboli's puppet theater. Now, a brief note on our first major villain. There are some who believe Stromboli is a racist caricature of the Romani people, the main evidence for this being his swarthy skin, the fact that Honest John calls him
That old gypsy that time.
and his colorful wagon. Personally, I'm not fully sold on this. Italians have a pretty wide range of skin tones, and some of them get pretty dark. Stromboli's face, and in particular his beard, are clearly based on the descriptions and illustrations of his counterpart in the book, Mangiafuoco, who, by the way, was much more reasonable. Book Pinocchio actually successfully convinces him to set him free, whereas Stromboli is just straight up evil.
And when you are growing too old, you will make good firewood.
I find it interesting how the film made who is good and who is bad much more distinct, with Pinocchio being softened and Stromboli made fully monstrous. As a last note on skin tone, I'll point out that the coachman is the palest character in the whole movie and arguably more villainous than the puppet master, which I'll get into more shortly. Stromboli also doesn't dress in Romani fashion. His style much more closely matches 19th century rural Italian clothing than anything else. His outfit isn't all that different from Geppetto's, honestly, apart from swapping the apron for a cummerbund. And his speech is clearly an overblown Italian accent with some Italian-sounding gibberish thrown in for good measure. Basically the 1940s version of Family Guy's bappity boopity. If Stromboli's depiction is racist toward anyone, it's Italians. As for the wagon, that is pretty clearly drawn in the classic style of a Vardo, the fancy painted wagons that Romani would live and travel in. But even at that time, these colorful carriages were being co-opted by outgroups such as circuses, and even children's author Roald Dahl bought one for his children to play in. A fun fact about the wagon in the movie, this is, as far as I can determine, the first instance of photocopying used in animation. The wagon would have been too difficult or time-consuming to animate by hand, so they took stop-motion pictures of a model and colored those afterwards. There's also some debate that Stromboli's intended to be Jewish because he likes money. And I'm not buying that either. Not every greedy person in the movies is a Jewish caricature. Maybe if he was wearing a yarmulke and had side curls, but no. As far as I'm concerned, Stromboli's just a greedy Italian man and nothing more. What is racist is this early concept art for one of his puppets, and I think we can all be glad it didn't make it into the movie. So what is Stromboli's role in the story? He is the wake-up call to Pinocchio that not everyone is a good person, even if they seem nice. Stromboli is all smiles and charm right up to the point that Pinocchio tries to leave when the puppet master throws him into a birdcage in a fit of rage. Now, in the Snow White video, I made clear that I feel that trusting in your fellow humans is a strength, not a weakness, and I do still stand by that. What Stromboli and the Queen both teach is that there is merit in caution and skepticism, particularly when someone offers you something that seems too good to be true. The old crone offers an apple that grants your deepest desire, while Honest John and Stromboli promise Pinocchio a life of leisure and wealth for almost no work at all. The lesson here isn't shut yourself in a bubble and don't talk to anyone, it's to be skeptical when someone promises you. If it seems like there's a catch, there probably is one. In the book, Pinocchio ends up in trouble because he deliberately chooses not to go to school and Collodi punishes him for his bad choice. In the film, Pinocchio wants to go to school but is led astray by manipulation. The lesson he learns from this experience isn't go to school or be punished, it's recognizing when someone is trying to manipulate you, and the next time he runs into Honest John, he is justifiably skeptical and has to be physically dragged away. The movie goes out of of its way to paint Pinocchio as ignorant and naive, not malicious or even mischievous. When Jiminy Cricket finds him in the birdcage, while initially rather cross that Pinocchio didn't make it to school, the bug pretty quickly softens and tries his best to set the puppet free. When the Blue Fairy arrives asking what happened, Pinocchio does lie to her, but out of shame, not trickery, and because he literally does not know that lying is wrong. He knows he fucked up, so he lies to try to avoid a feared punishment, but the Blue Fairy teaches us that most of the time just confessing what happened, particularly when a lot of it isn't really your fault, is the best thing to do. It's also interesting how the nose-growing incident is what people remember most about the Pinocchio story, but it only happens in this one particular scene and never again. It's not something built into Pinocchio, at least in the film, but a sort of temporary curse for this particular moment. I love that the nose doesn't just lengthen, but literally starts growing into a tree with leaves and a bird's nest at the end of it. However, the Blue Fairy takes pity on him and reverses it, not after Pinocchio tells her truly what happened, but after he promises not to lie again. I think it would have been good if he'd actually admitted things, but I can understand how in a film it would make sense not to recap what we literally just watched. So having learned his first lesson to be truthful and honest, Pinocchio is released. Now that might be a bit simplistic, as there are times when it is genuinely the right thing to lie, such as protecting someone hiding from an assailant, but again I can understand not wanting to muddy the waters too much for younger viewers. Pinocchio immediately tries to go home to Geppetto, knowing that his father is probably worried sick about him, but as previously mentioned, he once again gets sidetracked by Honest John.
Here we go again.
And now it's about time we talk about the coachman. Where Stromboli is simply greedy and abusive, the coachman is downright malevolent, seeming to take pleasure in the mere idea of turning boys into donkeys. It's not too much of a leap to read him as a pedophile.
I'm collecting stupid little boys.
And that face he makes is nightmare-inducing. Alone among the villains Pinocchio faces, the coachman seems to view himself as a sort of avenging angel, meting out punishment where he sees it to be deserved.
Your fun. Now pay for it.
A sort of stand-in for Collodi himself, if you will. But the coachman, with the help of Honest John, isn't simply some weird extension of law enforcement finding naughty boys and dealing with them. No, they are luring them in with promises of sweet treats and toys. This is entrapment. The coachman is essentially the guy with the white van full of candy.
Children, where are you?
Thus Pinocchio, along with a host of other young boys, become the victims of stranger danger. But at first, everything seems amazing. They get to eat, drink, smoke, fight, play pool, and break shit. What's not to love? But by the end of the night, every last one of them has been turned into a donkey. And Lampwick's transformation is legitimately terrifying. So what is the lesson here? What sin is being punished? With Stromboli, Pinocchio learns to be honest, and I think most people would agree that honesty is generally a good thing. But here, what is the crime? Hedonism? As I discussed earlier, in medieval Europe, peasants viewed this kind of lifestyle as a dream to aspire to, and there are plenty of rich and powerful people who have lived their whole lives like this with little to no judgment. That is, right up until those guillotines started falling. In my view, there is nothing wrong with enjoying life's pleasures. Consider me completely on board for fully automated luxury space communism. However, excess becomes an issue when it is not sustainable. When the king eats and drinks and smokes himself to an early grave, that's just one person, and typically he's at the top of an entire system dedicated to making sure all his wants are met. When a whole society tries to live like a king, well, then you have unregulated capitalism. Looking at Pleasure Island after all the fun has been done, we see trash and broken buildings and wasted food. Who's going to clean up after this? Who's going to resupply everything that's been consumed? Who's going to rebuild everything that's been broken? How long can this continue? How long can we keep churning petroleum out of the Earth's crust and spewing it into the atmosphere to keep our factories or cars or planes or homes running? Under capitalism run by the fossil fuel industry, the entire planet is one massive pleasure island. If we can't rein in our consumption, there's a much worse fate in store for us than being turned into donkeys. Now, I don't think Walt Disney himself was some sort of proto-Greenpeace hippie arguing for environmental stability. The man was to his core a capitalist. We'll talk about his views on unions when we get to Dumbo. But moderation being a virtue is a pretty old idea, and it's certainly not the worst thing to teach children. It's okay to have fun as long as it's not hurting you or anyone else. Having escaped once more, this time under his own power, Pinocchio finally makes it back home to Geppetto. However, upon arriving, he finds the toy shop abandoned, and the blue fairy sends him a message that his father has been swallowed by a whale.
A whale?
Now pay attention, because right here is what I believe to be the most important part of the movie. Pinocchio hears his father is in trouble and without any hesitation turns on his heel and marches straight to the ocean to find him. This is the moment in my view when Pinocchio becomes a real boy. The blue fairy tasked him to be brave, truthful, and unselfish, and in deciding to rescue Geppetto without any need for convincing, he meets those criteria with flying colors. Jiminy even tries to dissuade him at first and trying to point out how dangerous such a mission would be, but Pinocchio does not care. He knows what the right thing to do is, and by God, he's gonna do it. And to his credit, once Jiminy realizes he's not going to change Pinocchio's mind, he comes along too. So begins Pinocchio's final test, told through some incredible underwater animation. After some hijinks with some ocean life, he finds Monstro the whale. When the beast awakens to feed, the puppet is swallowed and finally reunited with his father. Geppetto is understandably concerned that his son is now half puppet, half furry, but what really matters is that they're back together. And here Pinocchio proves he's not just brave and unselfish, but clever too, and he starts a smoky fire to get Monstro to sneeze and release them. The following sequence is fantastically animated, incredibly tense, and ends, unfortunately, with Pinocchio face down in a tide pool. In a scene very reminiscent to the end of Snow White, our supporting cast gathers around our supposedly dead protagonist, only for the blue fairy to finally do good by her word and transform Pinocchio into a meat child as promised. There is much rejoicing, Jiminy gets a shiny gold badge, and a reprise of When You Wish Upon a Star plays us out to the end title. So what does make a good person? For millennia, philosophers and priests have pointed to this or that attribute as a defining characteristic of goodness, but I think most people, to paraphrase Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart, know it when they see it. You don't need a holy scripture or a philosophical treatise to know how to be good. It's not something you need to be taught. Pinocchio knew all along how to be good. What he really needed to learn was how to navigate an unkind world. A person is good when they choose to be good. A good person can put on the ring of Gyges and even invisible do no harm. Pinocchio could have, upon arriving home from Pleasure Island, lived a long and happy life on his own, and yet he chose, with no one but his conscience to judge his actions, to set out and do the right thing. To be good is pretty simple when it comes down to it. All that is required is the courage to do what you deep down know is right. But if that doesn't suffice for you, or you're like me and you had to teach yourself social cues, I'll give you a hint. It's empathy. It's not industriousness or loyalty or independence or obedience to authority. It's empathy. And I think that's why Collodi's book had to change and it was turned into a film. When you actually see Lampwick being turned into a donkey, you're not thinking, wow, what a justified comeuppance for that young whippersnapper. You're horrified. You're imagining that happening to you. And in so doing, you don't want it to happen to Lampwick, no matter what a rotten egg he might seem to be. Jiminy struggles to explain to Pinocchio what being good actually is because in every other sense it's complicated. Maybe the guy you borrowed a knife from will stab himself if you return it. Maybe the thief you see had been stolen from. Maybe the would-be murderer is in fact laying to rest a friend in pain. Maybe a life of indulgence and pleasure is draining away life from those required to support it. The only real guiding principle you can rely on is to remember that other people are people, whether they're flesh or a robot or a puppet, and they deserve to be treated as a person, to be treated how you believe you should be treated, and to pretend it's anything more than that is just a load of waffle. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the Disney canon. I hope you'll come along next time when I explore the infinite realm of the animator's imagination with Fantasia.